Why did Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon, descend into a cave in Ecuador 7 years after his historic lunar mission? In 1976, the astronaut joined a classified expedition to explore underground passages that may contain humanity's most guarded secrets. We're talking about a metal library with thousands of plates covered in symbols that predate known civilization, chambers that seal themselves from unworthy explorers, and indigenous guardians who've protected these mysteries for 50 generations. Armstrong's journals from this expedition remain classified. What did he discover in those depths that was too dangerous for public knowledge? The year is 1969. Janos Moric stands at the mouth of the Cueva de los Tallos, his headlamp piercing primordial darkness that has swallowed countless souls before him. Local Shuar warriors watch silently from the forest edge, their faces painted with sacred symbols passed down through 50 generations. They know this Hungarian explorer carries both blessing and curse as he prepares to descend into their ancestors' realm. What the determined searcher claims to find in those depths ignites a firestorm that eventually brings Neil Armstrong himself to Ecuador 7 years later. But this story begins thousands of years earlier, when the first humans arrived in these lands. They came as hunters, following mammoth herds through mountain passes covered in ice and snow. The Paleolithic wanderers sought shelter from storms that could freeze a man's breath in his lungs, and they found caves that sang with voices no living throat could produce. In the flickering light of resin torches, these ancient artists painted the walls with geometric patterns that shamans today say map the soul's journey after death. These prehistoric inhabitants knew something modern science struggles to explain. Certain caves connected to vast tunnel systems, extending hundreds of miles through solid granite. The passages descended deeper than any natural formation should reach, carved with precision that suggested tools unknown to Stone Age peoples. Yet the paintings on the walls showed human hands, human faces, human ceremonies conducted in chambers where daylight never penetrated. The Valdivia people discovered the sacred nature of these underground realms 3,500 years before Christ. Masters of clay who shaped the famous Venus figurines, they built their temples directly above specific tunnel entrances scattered throughout what would become Ecuador. Their priestesses descended monthly into the Earth's womb during lunar eclipses, carrying offerings of ceramic vessels filled with chicha beer and coca leaves blessed by village elders. These ceramic artists possessed knowledge that archaeologists are only beginning to understand. The clay workers selected temple sites based on acoustic properties that amplified sound in supernatural ways. Prayers whispered at ground level echoed through underground chambers for hours, creating harmonious resonances that induced trance states in anyone listening from within the passages. The early civilization had discovered that certain locations served as doorways between the world of the living and realms where spirits dwelt. Their priestesses emerged from these monthly journeys with prophecies that guided planting seasons and harvest rituals. The ancient people claimed their religious leaders could speak with the dead, receive visions of future floods or droughts, and even commune with star beings who taught them the secrets of pottery and agriculture. Village shamans insisted the underground passages led to the place where all knowledge was stored, guarded by serpent spirits who tested each visitor's worthiness to receive sacred wisdom. When Conquistador Francisco Orellana tortured their descendants for gold's location centuries later, the captured chiefs died with smiles on their bloodied faces. The Spanish explorer had discovered the mighty Amazon River during his epic journey from the Andes to the Atlantic, but the indigenous prisoners knew he sought treasure that could never be found through violence. They understood the true riches lay not in metal that could be melted and shaped, but in knowledge preserved in darkness below their feet. Orellana's men used heated iron and boiling water to extract information from captured village leaders. The conquistador demanded maps showing gold deposits, locations of silver veins, and routes to cities paved with precious stones. His interpreters translated screams into geographical coordinates, but the dying chief spoke only of passages where ancestors walked, chambers where songs never ended, and guardians who protected mysteries too dangerous for greedy hearts to possess. The Spanish explorer never found the golden cities he sought. His expedition ended in disaster when hostile tribes attacked his boats during the descent of the Amazon. But before Orellana died from fever and arrow wounds, he wrote in his journal about caves that seemed to extend beneath entire mountain ranges. Native guides had spoken of underground rivers where fish swam blind through eternal night, and passages where a man could walk for days without seeing sky. Centuries passed while Ecuador's mountains kept their secrets. Spanish colonial administrators forbade exploration of cave systems after several expeditions vanished without trace. The Catholic Church declared the passages cursed, claiming demons dwelt in depths where Christian prayers brought no comfort. Colonial records describe strange sounds echoing from certain caves during earthquakes, as if vast spaces existed far below the surface, where human voices called out in languages no living person recognized. The Shuar people became the primary guardians of these mysteries after other tribes fled or fell to European diseases. These fierce warriors had resisted Inca conquest and Spanish colonization through superior knowledge of jungle warfare and spiritual practices that terrified their enemies. The guardians developed rituals using ayahuasca and other sacred plants that allowed shamans to navigate the underground passages in visions, mapping routes no physical explorer could follow. Traditional knowledge holders passed down precise instructions for approaching the cave entrances. Certain seasons brought favorable conditions when the passages sang with welcoming voices. Other times, the shamans warned, the tunnels filled with malevolent spirits who drove intruders mad or led them into endless mazes where their bones would never be found. The people learned to read signs in wind patterns, bird behavior, and plant growth that indicated whether the underground realm welcomed visitors. During the 19th century, rumors of vast cave systems attracted European explorers seeking scientific discoveries that would make their reputations. German naturalists, French archaeologists, and British adventurers attempted to penetrate the mountain passages using modern equipment and systematic mapping techniques. Most returned empty-handed, reporting only natural limestone formations and underground streams that followed predictable geological patterns. But some explorers brought back stories that contradicted their official reports. They spoke privately of chambers carved with geometric precision, passages that seemed to extend far beyond what their instruments could measure, and acoustic phenomena that created three-dimensional sound images in complete darkness. A few claimed to have found metal plates covered with unknown symbols, though none could produce photographic evidence that survived their return journeys. By the 1960s, most serious researchers had dismissed the tunnel legends as indigenous folklore mixed with colonial Spanish fantasies. The mountains of Ecuador contained interesting cave systems, but nothing that challenged conventional understanding of pre-Columbian civilizations. Archaeological surveys had documented numerous sites showing advanced pottery, sophisticated agriculture, and complex social organization, but no evidence of the massive underground construction projects described in local traditions. Then Janos Moric arrived with different intentions. The Hungarian explorer had spent years studying ancient languages, metallurgy, and indigenous oral traditions throughout South America, Unlike treasure hunters or academic researchers, the outsider approached the Shuar people with genuine respect for their spiritual beliefs and willingness to follow traditional protocols for cave exploration. Moritz learned the Shuar language and participated in ayahuasca ceremonies that revealed the sacred geography of the tunnel systems. Village elders gradually shared knowledge that had been hidden from all previous foreigners, explaining how certain caves connected to passage networks that extended beneath multiple countries. The man who changed everything discovered that indigenous peoples had maintained detailed maps of the underground realm for thousands of years, passed down through shamanic lineages, trained to remember vast amounts of geographical information. The determined searcher spent months gaining the trust necessary to receive permission for actual cave exploration. Shuar shamans explained that the passages would reveal their secrets only to individuals whose hearts contained no greed or desire for personal glory. Traditional guardians had learned through bitter experience that the underground realm protected itself from exploitation, driving away those who approached with wrong intentions while welcoming sincere seekers of knowledge. On July 21st, 1969, the same day Neil Armstrong walked on the moon's surface, Janos Moritz descended into the Cueva de los Tallos, carrying traditional offerings of tobacco, coca leaves, and fermented beverages blessed by Shuar elders. What the Hungarian explorer claimed to discover in those depths would eventually bring the famous American astronaut to Ecuador, creating connections between outer space exploration and the deepest mysteries hidden beneath Earth's surface. The sacred cave yielded treasures that exceeded even Moritz's wildest expectations. Deep within passages that required hours of careful navigation, through narrow openings and across underground chasms, the explorer found chambers containing what appeared to be a vast library. Thousands of metal plates, each covered with symbols resembling no known writing system, had been arranged in systematic order on stone shelves carved directly from living rock. Moritz photographed hundreds of these metallic sheets, documenting symbols that seemed to combine elements from various ancient scripts with geometric patterns of stunning complexity. The metal library appeared to contain cross-referenced information, with index plates directing readers to specific subjects organized according to principles the Hungarian explorer could barely comprehend. Some sheets showed astronomical diagrams, others displayed mathematical formulas, and many contained narrative sequences that might record historical events or mythological stories. The discovery that would change everything extended beyond the metal plates themselves. The chambers containing the library demonstrated construction techniques that challenged conventional understanding of ancient capabilities. Massive granite blocks had been fitted together with precision exceeding modern standards, creating spaces that remained perfectly dry despite underground rivers flowing nearby. The passages showed evidence of ventilation systems that maintained constant air circulation, though no obvious openings connected to the surface. Most remarkably, certain chambers produced acoustic effects that seemed to defy natural laws. Whispers spoken in specific locations amplified into clearly audible voices throughout entire room systems, while shouts from other positions created no echoes at all. Moritz discovered that the builders had engineered sound properties that allowed complex communication between chambers separated by thousands of feet of solid rock. The Hungarian explorer emerged from his underground journey fundamentally changed by what he had witnessed. But when Moritz attempted to lead official expeditions to verify his claims, the Shuar guides took them to different cave systems containing only natural formations. The protectors explained that the sacred passages revealed themselves only when approached through proper spiritual preparation, not scientific investigation motivated by curiosity or desire for fame. Moritz spent the remaining years of his life fighting legal battles over tunnel access rights, while trying to convince authorities that he had discovered evidence of advanced prehistoric civilizations. His photographs sparked intense debate among linguists and archaeologists, but without access to the actual site, most scholars dismissed his claims as elaborate hoaxes or misinterpretations of natural rock formations. The Hungarian explorer's struggle attracted attention from unexpected sources. Intelligence agencies began investigating possible connections between the tunnel systems and strategic resources. Religious organizations sent representatives to determine whether the discoveries challenged biblical chronologies. Most significantly, space program administrators became interested in acoustic phenomena that might explain how ancient peoples could have developed sophisticated understanding of sound-based technologies. This growing interest culminated in 1976, when Neil Armstrong agreed to participate in a joint British-Ecuadorian expedition to the Cueva de los Tallos. The astronaut, who had walked on lunar soil, would soon descend into Earth's deepest mysteries, seeking answers to questions that connected humanity's past with its cosmic destiny. The moonwalkers' involvement transformed local cave exploration into an international phenomenon that continues influencing researchers today. The darkness that had beckoned János Moritz 7 years earlier would soon welcome the first human being to set foot on another world. In the depths beneath Ecuador's mountains, ancient passages waited to reveal whether the same intelligence that had created underground libraries might also hold keys to understanding humanity's place in the universe beyond Earth's atmosphere. Dawn breaks over the Amazon as Shuar warriors perform the ritual that has protected the tunnels for 50 generations. Young Tsunki drinks Natem, the sacred ayahuasca brew, while his grandfather sings the ancient protection songs passed down since the Great Flood 8 centuries ago. The youth's body trembles as the spirit medicine courses through his veins, opening doorways in his mind that lead to realms where ancestors still walk and jungle spirits speak in voices older than human memory. In his vision, Tsunki sees the subterranean rivers, where anaconda spirits guard crystal chambers that pulse with inner light. The great serpent shows him corridors where his ancestors' souls wait to be reborn, their essence preserved in pools of water that never freeze despite existing far below ground where sunlight cannot penetrate. Most terrifying of all, the vision reveals forbidden zones where even the most powerful shamans fear to venture, depths where entities dwell that predate human arrival in these mountains by countless ages. The sacred brew carries the young seeker deeper into mysteries his tribe has guarded since their people first entered these lands. He witnesses the moment when mysterious Tayo's birds led starving refugees to cave entrances during the catastrophic flood that destroyed their previous homeland. The nightbirds, with their supernatural ability to navigate in absolute darkness, guided survivors through tunnels that connected to safe highlands where they could rebuild their shattered civilization. Inside the chambers, revealed by their winged guides, Tsunki's ancestors found evidence of a civilization far more advanced than their own. Metal sheets covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly lay stacked on stone shelves carved with geometric precision. Crystal skulls sat in niches that focused moonlight entering through hidden openings, their translucent surfaces glowing with phosphorescence that illuminated entire rooms without need for torches or fires. The vision shows him chambers carved with impossible precision, their walls fitted together without mortar, yet remaining perfectly stable through centuries of earthquakes that toppled surface buildings. Tools made from metals his people could not identify lay scattered across stone tables, their edges still sharp despite obvious age. Most remarkable of all, some rooms contained air that remained fresh and breathable, despite existing far below ground with no visible connection to surface ventilation. Young Tsunki witnesses his ancestors debate over these discoveries. Tribal elders recognized they had stumbled upon knowledge and technology beyond their current understanding, gifts left by builders whose capabilities exceeded anything their shamans had imagined possible. The responsibility of protecting these secrets would transform Shuar society, creating warrior shamans who could kill in both physical and spiritual realms to prevent the sacred sites from falling into unworthy hands. The Guardians developed elaborate protocols for approaching the cave systems, rituals that combined traditional plant medicines with specific offerings designed to appease whatever entities still dwelt in the depths. Only individuals who had proven their spiritual strength through years of training could enter the deepest chambers, and even they required constant protection through prayers, protective songs, an alliance with friendly spirits who served as guides through the maze-like networks. His grandfather's voice anchors Tsunki to the present as the ayahuasca vision begins to fade. The elder explains how their people became the unconquerable ones through mastery of both surface warfare and spiritual combat techniques learned from beings that inhabited the tunnel systems. Warriors who trained in the sacred caves developed abilities that seemed supernatural to their enemies, appearing and disappearing at will, striking from directions that should have been impossible, and calling upon spiritual allies that could drive opponents mad with terror. When rubber barons invaded Shuar territory in the 1800s, seeking slaves for their extraction camps and land for their expanding operations, they discovered why local people called these mountain dwellers those who cannot be conquered. The forest people had learned to use the tunnel networks as strategic highways, moving large groups of warriors undetected across vast distances through routes that existed far below the jungle floor, where surface scouts could never track them. Entire expeditions of rubber tappers vanished after being led into tunnel mazes by guides who claimed to know shortcuts through the mountains. The invaders followed their indigenous escorts into cave openings that seemed large enough for pack animals, only to find themselves in narrow corridors that branched endlessly in all directions. Hours later, when they tried to retrace their steps, the passages led to different chambers than they remembered entering. The few survivors who emerged from these deadly mazes spoke of warriors who appeared from solid rock walls, striking with obsidian-edged weapons before melting back into stone surfaces that showed no trace of hidden openings. They described voices in unknown languages that echoed from depths no torch could illuminate, and the sensation of being watched by invisible eyes that followed their every movement through corridors that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. More terrifying still were reports of spiritual attacks that left men alive, but fundamentally changed. Rubber barons who entered certain cave systems returned speaking in tongues, their minds broken by visions of cosmic horrors that dwelt in spaces between dimensions. Some developed inexplicable fears of enclosed spaces. Others began carving symbols they claimed channeled messages from entities that demanded worship in exchange for safe passage through the tunnel networks. The Shuar's most powerful shamans, the Uwishin, claimed they learned their deadliest curses from beings dwelling in the deepest chambers, entities that predated human memory and possessed knowledge of spiritual warfare techniques that could kill enemies from hundreds of miles away. These medicine men spoke of descending to levels where gravity behaved strangely, where water flowed upward in defiance of natural laws, and where time moved differently than on the surface world. Elders spoke of meetings with the ancient ones who had carved the first tunnels, entities of pure awareness that could take on flesh when needed, but lived mostly as flowing patterns of luminous intelligence. These entities tested each visitor's worthiness through challenges that revealed the true contents of their hearts. granting profound knowledge to those who passed while driving failures insane or trapping them forever in dimensional mazes from which no escape was possible. The protection rituals developed by generations of shamans involved complex negotiations with these powerful beings, offering gifts of tobacco, rare plants, and spiritual energy in exchange for permission to use specific routes through the tunnel networks. Breaking these agreements brought swift and terrible retribution. Violators found themselves lost in spaces that existed partially outside normal reality, where their screams could be heard echoing from cave entrances for months after their physical bodies had disappeared. During the peak rubber boom period, when thousands of workers flooded into Amazonian territories under the protection of well-armed company militias, the Shuar demonstrated the strategic value of controlling these ancient tunnel systems. On a predetermined signal, warriors emerged simultaneously from cave openings across hundreds of square miles, coordinating the first and only successful Pan-Amazonian uprising that drove foreign exploiters from vast territories in a matter of days. The tribal defenders collapsed strategic cave entrances behind retreating invaders, trapping over 300 armed overseers in tunnel systems that offered no escape routes to the surface. The rubber company's retaliation was swift and brutal, with military expeditions burning entire villages and killing thousands of indigenous people in punishment for their coordinated resistance. But the companies never again attempted large-scale tunnel exploration, having learned the fatal consequences of underestimating peoples who controlled access to realms beyond ordinary human understanding. Spanish colonial administrators had made similar mistakes centuries earlier, officially declaring the tunnel networks natural formations of no economic value, while secretly funding expeditions that continued failing for 300 years. These clandestine explorations sought gold and silver deposits reported by indigenous informants, but the Spanish forces found only death and madness in chambers protected by spiritual guardians that recognized no European authority. Church records from the colonial period describe exorcism rituals performed on soldiers who returned from tunnel expeditions, speaking in ancient languages and claiming allegiance to non-Christian entities they encountered in the depths. Catholic priests reported that conventional religious ceremonies provided no protection against whatever forces dwelt in the cave systems, and several missionary expeditions ended with their leaders converting to indigenous spiritual practices after witnessing phenomena that challenged their theological understanding. The Shuar developed their reputation as headhunters, partly through practical need to prevent outsiders from learning tunnel locations through torture or interrogation. Removing the heads of defeated enemies served both as psychological warfare against future invaders and as spiritual protection against vengeful spirits of those who died knowing sacred secrets. The shrunken heads, prepared through elaborate rituals, were believed to trap the departed souls and prevent them from revealing tunnel maps to dream realm spies sent by enemy shamans. Old tales tell how the most gifted Uwishin could send their minds drifting through the tunnels in ayahuasca visions, walking corridors and chambers without ever leaving their place. These shamanic scouts reported encountering other spiritual explorers from distant tribes, creating an invisible communication network that connected indigenous peoples across thousands of miles of seemingly impenetrable jungle terrain. Young Tsunki's initiation ceremony concludes as his grandfather explains the sacred obligations that come with tunnel knowledge. Each generation must produce guardians capable of protecting the ancient sites, while gradually sharing their secrets with individuals proven worthy of such profound responsibilities. The youth learns that his people serve as trustees for discoveries that could either elevate human consciousness to cosmic levels or destroy civilization through misuse by those motivated by greed rather than wisdom. The forest people understand that forces dwelling in the deepest chambers are neither good nor evil in human terms, but rather representatives of cosmic intelligence that operates according to laws transcending ordinary moral categories. These entities offer transformation to those ready to abandon ego-driven desires, while eliminating individuals whose presence threatens the spiritual ecology, maintained through millions of years of careful development. As dawn light filters through jungle canopy, Tsunki emerges from his vision quest fundamentally changed by what he has witnessed. The young warrior now carries responsibility for protecting secrets that connect his people to mysteries spanning cosmic time. He joins the endless chain of guardians who have maintained their vigil through conquest, colonization, and modernization, knowing that patient entities in the sacred darkness continue testing humanity's readiness to receive gifts that could transform the species forever. The Amazon stretches endlessly in all directions, its green cathedral hiding entrance points to realms where ancient builders wait in chambers carved from living stone. Above ground, the modern world continues its frantic pace of development and destruction, unaware that far below their feet, patient teachers preserve knowledge that could solve every crisis currently threatening human survival. The guardians watch and wait, maintaining their sacred trust until the surface world proves ready to approach the tunnel systems with proper reverence for forces that shaped consciousness itself. Long before the Inca dreamed of empire, master builders carved the impossible passages beneath Ecuador's mountains. The Cañari people preserve memories of these enigmatic ancestors in songs sung only during winter solstice ceremonies, when mountain winds carry voices of the dead, and shamans can speak with spirits who remember the time before time. They tell of the Viracochans, pale beings who emerged from Lake Titicaca with tools that cut stone like butter, and knowledge of channels that could carry water through solid rock across hundreds of miles. These mysterious teachers appeared during the age when ice covered the high peaks, and great floods swept away entire civilizations in single nights. The mountain dwellers sing of how the Viracochans arrived in boats that moved without sails or oars, carrying instruments made from metals that never tarnished and crystals that glowed within a fire. The pale beings spoke all languages perfectly, yet claimed to come from beyond the edge of the world, where stars touched water and time flowed differently than in mortal realms. The advanced beings selected specific locations for corridor construction, based on principles the Cañari elders still struggle to explain, using crystal instruments that detected invisible energies flowing through mountain stone. The Viracochans identified places where these power lines crossed in geometric patterns. At each intersection, they established workshops where local people learned to shape granite, using techniques that required no metal tools, only focused intention guided by harmonic frequencies produced through specialized chanting. Families of builders continued their craft across ages, every lineage holding responsibility for expanding chosen corridors through the living rock. Fathers taught sons the sacred geometry that determined pathway dimensions, while mothers trained daughters in the acoustic principles that created resonance chambers capable of amplifying whispered words across vast distances. The most skilled families earned the honor of carving the deepest levels, where energies concentrated so powerfully that workers developed supernatural abilities. Children grew old in the darkness, their eyes adapting until sunlight became painful and torch flames seemed bright as lightning. The builders developed unique physical characteristics, enhanced hearing that could detect approaching earthquakes hours before ground dwellers felt tremors, magnetic sensitivity that allowed navigation without instruments, and night vision so acute They could identify individual faces in starlight, filtered through miles of stone corridors. They developed a sign language of shadows and torch movements, a form of communication that required no sound in the echoing depths, where spoken words could travel for hours through interconnected cavern systems. Master architects directed construction using hand signals visible from hundreds of feet away, coordinating work crews who carved simultaneously on multiple levels without ever meeting face to face during their lifetimes. The Pale Teachers provided tools that defied natural laws as the mountain tribe understood them. Metal implements that remained sharp through decades of constant use against hard stone. Ropes woven from plant fibers that could support massive granite blocks without breaking. And most remarkably, devices that could soften solid rock temporarily, allowing workers to shape corridors and rooms using only their hands before the stone hardened again into permanent form. Master architects directed construction according to mathematical principles encoded in crystal formations that grew naturally at specific depths beneath mountain peaks. These sacred stones resonated at frequencies that matched planetary rhythms, creating harmonic networks that connected passage systems across vast geographical distances. Where energy lines crossed with sufficient intensity, the builders excavated vast halls that could accommodate thousands during ceremonies, when the entire network sang with coordinated frequencies. The cavern cities housed permanent populations who developed remarkable adaptations to their lightless environment. Artists created sculptures designed to be experienced through touch rather than sight, their fingers reading stories carved in stone walls that told histories spanning millennia. Musicians composed symphonies of echoes and dripping water, performances that used natural acoustics to create three-dimensional sound experiences impossible to achieve above ground. Specially shaped chambers cradled the birthing process, their frequencies weaving a trance that soothed mothers while enveloping attendants in the same spell. These birth halls featured carved walls that focused sound waves in patterns matching the rhythm of contracting muscles, while crystal formations provided gentle illumination that helped newborns adapt gradually to the visual world they would inhabit. Children born in the depths learned to run through corridors, guided only by air currents and stone texture beneath bare feet. They played games that developed echolocation abilities, competing to identify hidden objects through sound alone, or to navigate complex mazes in absolute darkness. The young dwellers could sense approaching strangers from miles away by feeling vibrations transmitted through solid rock, making surprise attacks against their communities virtually impossible. The builders established sophisticated water management systems that tapped into aquifers hundreds of feet below the ground level, channeling fresh springs through gravity-fed networks that supplied every level of their multi-story cities. Waste disposal utilized natural bacterial processes that broke down organic matter in chambers specifically designed for biological recycling, while air circulation systems maintained breathable atmosphere through principles that modern engineers still cannot fully comprehend. Their agricultural systems produced food crops in chambers illuminated by phosphorescent fungi, cultivated to emit specific wavelengths that promoted plant growth. Root vegetables thrived in soil mixtures that included powdered minerals from deep geological layers, creating nutrition sources rich in trace elements unavailable to above-ground farmers. Protein came from fish raised in aquifer pools and insects bred in carefully controlled environments that maximized reproduction while minimizing resource consumption. When volcanic eruptions threatened topside communities with poisonous gases and molten rock flows, entire populations fled into the passage networks seeking temporary shelter. Many chose never to return to the harsh world above, swelling the ranks of permanent cavern dwellers who developed increasingly sophisticated subterranean civilizations over the course of centuries. It was said that the Pale Teachers gathered the gifted into hidden academies, teaching them arts of construction that quickened the expansion of the underground networks. These schools taught sacred mathematics, harmonic engineering, and energy manipulation methods that allowed small work crews to accomplish tasks that should have required thousands of laborers. Graduates could cut through solid rock at rates that seemed impossible, following precise architectural plans that coordinated multiple construction sites across different mountain ranges. Sacred sites within the passage networks served as communication centers, where messages traveled instantly between distant locations, through methods the Kanyari describe as speaking through stone. Priests trained in these techniques could coordinate construction projects, share discoveries, and maintain cultural unity across populations separated by hundreds of miles of exterior terrain, but connected through the network of carefully engineered corridors. The master builders created detailed maps carved in stone walls that showed not only pathway layouts, but also exterior features, weather patterns, and seasonal changes that affected construction schedules. These three-dimensional charts included information about geological stability, water table levels, and energy field fluctuations that determined optimal timing for various types of work. Later civilizations studying these maps discovered they contained astronomical data, predicting eclipses and planetary alignments centuries in advance. In the deepest levels, whole communities gathered for ceremonies inside vast cathedral-like halls, where resonant tones carried them into shared visions that shaped choices about new passages and the use of resources. These gatherings occurred during specific planetary alignments that maximized energy flows through crystal formations, creating conditions where individual consciousness could merge temporarily with the group mind that directed overall construction planning. The builders developed metalworking techniques that produced alloys unknown to exterior civilizations, metals that remained flexible in extreme cold, yet became harder than steel when exposed to specific frequencies. They created cutting tools that maintained sharp edges through constant use, construction implements that could shape stone with the precision of modern machines, and decorative objects that seemed to glow with internal light sources requiring no external power. Their textile production utilized fibers from plants that grew only in the unique atmospheric conditions found at specific depths within mountain cores. These materials could be woven into fabrics that provided insulation superior to animal furs, while remaining lightweight and flexible. The weavers created patterns that incorporated mathematical sequences related to construction principles, producing ceremonial garments that served as portable reference materials for architectural knowledge. Hidden portals connected the cavern's cities to distant partners in trade, yet could be shut without warning should peril or upheaval descend. Outside, peoples provided materials unavailable in the depths, exotic foods, rare pigments, and metals that required specialized mining techniques, while receiving manufactured goods that demonstrated technological capabilities far exceeding their own civilizational development. The pale beings eventually departed as mysteriously as they had arrived, leaving behind fully trained populations capable of maintaining and expanding the passage networks without direct supervision. They promised to return when humanity proved ready to accept greater responsibilities, but warned that the corridors would seal themselves against those who approached with intentions of conquest or exploitation, rather than genuine desire for knowledge and wisdom. The Kanyari preserve oral traditions describing the final ceremonies when the Viracochans prepared for their departure. The advanced beings gathered master builders from throughout the corridor networks, sharing ultimate secrets that would allow continued expansion of the subterranean empire, while maintaining harmony with exterior populations and natural environmental systems that supported all life in the mountain regions. Before leaving, the Pale Teachers established protocols for protecting the passage systems during times when outside civilizations might attempt to exploit the cavern networks for military purposes or resource extraction. They taught certain families to serve as guardians who could seal specific sections or redirect routes to prevent unauthorized access while maintaining functionality for legitimate users who approached with proper intentions and spiritual preparation. Long after their teachers had vanished, the master builders carried on for generations, stretching the tunnel systems until they spanned thousands of square miles beneath mountain chains. They developed their own innovations that improved upon techniques learned from the Viracochans, creating increasingly sophisticated cavern cities that housed populations numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Eventually, natural disasters and exterior conflicts disrupted the subterranean civilizations, forcing most inhabitants to abandon their cities below ground and integrate with populations above that retained only fragmented memories of the sophisticated cultures that once thrived in the depths. But the passages themselves endured, waiting through centuries of abandonment for the time when humanity would rediscover the wisdom of those who learned to build empires beneath the mountains. The Chaven priests knew secrets modern archaeologists are only beginning to rediscover. In 900 BC, they built Chavin de Huantar, with galleries designed to disorient and transform consciousness through methods that combined architecture with spiritual technology. Water roared through hidden channels, creating infrasound that induced religious visions, while carved stone heads projected from walls at precise angles that focused acoustic energy into concentrated beams. But the temple complex was merely the visible portion of a vast network extending from Peru into Ecuador through passages that connected sacred sites across impossible distances. Initiation into the priesthood required a journey through these corridors that lasted 40 days and nights, without seeing sunlight or breathing air that had touched the sky. Candidates consumed San Pedro cactus before descending, the mescaline mixing with sensory deprivation to produce visions of jaguar transformation that changed them permanently. The sacred plant opened doorways in consciousness that allowed human minds to merge with feline spirits, dwelling in crystal chambers far below the ceremonial center. Those who survived emerged as shapeshifters, claiming ability to travel instantly between distant temples through passages that existed simultaneously in physical and spiritual dimensions. They spoke of meeting the old gods in crystalline halls, beings of pure light who taught them astronomy, mathematics, and the art of moving massive stones using sound frequencies that resonated with planetary vibrations. These ancient entities demonstrated technologies that seemed miraculous to human understanding, manipulating matter through focused intention, combined with harmonic principles. The priests learned to cut granite blocks weighing hundreds of tons with tools that left no metal residue, fitting stones together so precisely that knife blades could not penetrate the joints. They carved intricate galleries beneath Chavin de Huantar that amplified whispered prayers into thunderous reverberations, while simultaneously dampening loud shouts into barely audible murmurs. The acoustic engineering required mathematical knowledge that encompassed both architectural design and deep understanding of how sound waves interact with human consciousness. Water management systems channeled mountain streams through the temple complex in patterns that created specific frequencies when liquid flowed across carved stone surfaces. The priests discovered that certain combinations of water sounds, architectural acoustics, and psychoactive plant preparation could induce controlled transformation states where initiates experienced direct communication with entities who claimed to be humanity's original teachers. The passage system served practical purposes beyond ritual transformation. Messages traveled from coastal settlements to mountain cities in hours rather than days, carried by runners who knew every corridor by touch and could navigate in absolute darkness at speeds that seemed supernatural to observers. These messenger priests developed enlarged lung capacity for high-altitude running and enhanced night vision that allowed them to function effectively in caverns where torch flames would consume precious oxygen. During wars between competing kingdoms, entire armies moved undetected through the network, emerging behind enemy lines like spirits materializing from solid rock. The strategic advantage provided by controlling these routes enabled relatively small Shavin forces to defeat much larger opponents who had no knowledge of the passage systems. Surprise attacks coordinated through the corridors allowed the mountain culture to expand its influence across regions that should have been impossible to conquer, given conventional military logistics. Caravans followed guarded passages that steered clear of enemy territories and impassable landscapes where commerce usually broke down. Sacred spondylus shells from tropical waters reached highland ceremonies without exposure to raiders, while exotic feathers, rare metals, and psychoactive plants traveled safely between distant regions. The economic power generated by controlling these trade highways funded construction of increasingly elaborate temple complexes, each connected to the growing network. The priests established way stations at regular intervals, where runners could rest, receive fresh supplies, and coordinate message deliveries across the vast distances covered by the corridor system. These underground posts housed permanent populations who maintained lighting systems, air circulation mechanisms, and food storage facilities that supported the constant traffic flowing through the passages. Some way stations grew into substantial communities, with workshops, ceremonial chambers, and residential areas that never saw daylight. Specialized craftsmen working in the deeper levels developed techniques for creating objects that incorporated both practical functionality and spiritual significance. They carved ceremonial masks that amplified the wearer's voice through acoustic principles, produced textiles that changed color when viewed under different lighting conditions, and forged metal implements that maintained perfect balance regardless of how they were held or used. The old gods taught selected priests to read energy patterns flowing through the earth itself, invisible currents that connected sacred sites across continental distances. These trained sensitives could predict earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and climate changes by monitoring fluctuations in the planetary energy grid. They established early warning systems that saved countless lives while positioning Shavin settlements to take advantage of favorable environmental conditions. In those hidden sanctuaries, worshippers communed directly with the light beings who made their homes in crystals born of certain strata. The ancient entities appeared as geometric patterns of pure energy that could assume temporary physical form when necessary for teaching purposes. They demonstrated healing techniques that could cure diseases considered incurable, architectural methods that defied conventional engineering principles, and consciousness expansion practices that allowed human minds to perceive reality from cosmic perspectives. The priests learned that these beings had guided human development through multiple civilizations that rose and fell in cycles corresponding to astronomical events beyond normal human awareness. Each culture received knowledge appropriate to its level of spiritual development, with advanced techniques reserved for societies that proved capable of using power responsibly rather than for conquest or exploitation of less developed peoples. Communities bound to the underground roots grew harvests of uncommon power, their crops richer in nourishment than anything known outside. Seeds blessed in the crystal chambers grew into vegetables and grains, that provided complete protein, essential minerals, and trace elements required for optimal human health. These enhanced foods enabled tunnel-dwelling populations to maintain physical strength and mental clarity, despite living in environments that should have caused deficiency diseases. The Chavin culture reached its peak when priests mastered the ability to coordinate consciousness expansion experiences across multiple sites simultaneously, creating group visions that encompassed thousands of participants scattered throughout the network. During these collective ceremonies, entire populations shared identical spiritual experiences that reinforced cultural unity and provided guidance for major decisions affecting the whole civilization. Within chambers built for sky watching, observers charted cosmic rhythms that dictated the best moments for building, planting, and sacred rites. The priests developed calendars that predicted eclipses, planetary conjunctions, and other cosmic events with accuracy that enabled precise coordination of religious ceremonies across vast geographical areas. The light beings gradually withdrew their direct involvement as Chavin civilization reached maturity, explaining that humanity needed to develop independence while retaining access to advanced knowledge for emergency situations. They established protocols for maintaining the passage systems and preserving essential techniques through priest lineages trained to pass down critical information through oral traditions that could survive cultural disruptions. Before departing to dimensions beyond normal human perception, the old gods sealed certain chambers containing technologies too dangerous for civilizations that had not achieved complete spiritual balance. They left instructions that these sealed areas would open automatically when humanity proved ready to handle advanced capabilities responsibly, while remaining inaccessible to those motivated by greed, conquest, or desire for personal power. The crystal formations continued generating energy that maintained optimal conditions within the passage networks even after the light beings withdrew their active presence. These natural power sources provided illumination, air circulation, and electromagnetic fields that preserved organic materials for centuries, while creating environmental conditions that promoted healing and consciousness expansion in properly prepared individuals. Long after Chavin influence waned, the corridors carried goods and ideas, linking diverse groups in economic ties stronger than shifting borders or rivalries. The peaceful exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies through the protected routes contributed to cultural development throughout the Andean region, while maintaining the spiritual significance of sites originally chosen by the ancient entities. Eventually, natural disasters and social changes disrupted the integrated civilization that had grown around the passage system, forcing most communities to abandon their underground cities and return to conventional living patterns above ground. But the corridors themselves remained intact, along with sealed chambers containing knowledge and technologies that wait for rediscovery by future generations, ready to approach them with appropriate spiritual preparation and pure intentions. The priests who maintained the system through its final centuries established hidden schools that preserved essential knowledge through secret lineages, ensuring that information about accessing and navigating the network would survive even if the broader culture forgot the tunnel's existence. These guardian traditions continued protecting the sacred sites while waiting for the prophesied time when humanity would rediscover its connection to the cosmic teachers who once walked among the gods in passages carved from living stone. Tupac Yupanqui stood before the sealed entrance near Inca, his army of 40,000 warriors unable to breach the massive stone barrier that protected the Cañari defenders. The mountain people had retreated into their ancestral stronghold, collapsing the main access routes behind them, using techniques their enemies could not comprehend. For 3 months, the siege continued, while Inca engineers attempted every method known to their civilization for breaking through walls that seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker under assault. The Cañari princess screamed as heated copper touched her flesh, but her torturers learned nothing from her agony, except that her people would die before revealing the secrets they guarded. Tupac Yupanqui watched the interrogation with growing frustration, knowing that winter would soon force his army to retreat if they could not capture the fortress that controlled access to the northern territories his father demanded for the expanding empire. On the 91st day of siege, desperation drove the Inca prince to offer the captured princess a choice between revealing one entrance or watching her infant son die slowly from poison. The mountain woman's resolve finally broke as she heard her child's cries, and she whispered directions to a hidden opening used for bringing water from the river below. The entrance lay concealed beneath centuries of accumulated debris, its stone covering carved with symbols that seemed to shift and move when viewed directly. What the Inca found inside changed their empire forever. The corridors contained not just refugees and supplies, but an entire civilization that had thrived in darkness for thousands of years. Workshops produced textiles of impossible fineness, their fibers woven from materials that glowed within a light. Chambers stored centuries of astronomical observations, recorded on gold plates that covered walls from floor to ceiling, with calculations predicting eclipses and planetary alignments far into the future. Most shocking of all, sealed burial chambers contained mummified remains of beings markedly different from any known peoples. These ancient dead stood over 7 feet tall with elongated skulls that housed brains nearly twice the size of normal humans. Double rows of teeth-filled jaws that could have crushed stone, while finger bones showed evidence of additional joints that would have provided manipulation capabilities far exceeding ordinary human dexterity. The Inca immediately claimed the network as divine inheritance, declaring that Tupac Yupanqui descended directly from the mysterious builders who had created these marvels. Imperial priests proclaimed that Inti, the sun god, had guided his chosen people to reclaim the sacred passages that rightfully belonged to those carrying divine blood in their veins. The conquered Cañari found themselves transformed from independent mountain people into servants tasked with maintaining systems their ancestors had merely inherited from greater powers. Under Huayna Capac, the empire expanded the corridor network to serve imperial needs, connecting major cities through passages wide enough for llama caravans carrying tribute from distant provinces. Teams of workers labored to clear collapsed sections and widen narrow routes, while engineers studied the original construction techniques to repair damage caused by earthquakes and floods that had occurred during centuries of abandonment. The most skilled chasqui runners trained from childhood to navigate in absolute darkness, memorizing every turn and obstacle along routes that stretched from Cusco to territories beyond Quito. These elite messengers could carry imperial commands across distances that required weeks of travel above ground, delivering orders in just 72 hours through passages that eliminated the delays caused by mountain weather and hostile terrain. Imperial architects studied the chamber designs and discovered that certain rooms amplified sound, while others absorbed it completely, creating acoustic conditions that served different ceremonial purposes. They learned to distinguish between storage areas, religious spaces, and residential chambers, based on architectural features that revealed the builders' sophisticated understanding of how environment shapes human consciousness and behavior. The network became the empire's circulatory system, moving not just messages but entire armies, through routes that allowed strategic surprise against enemies who expected attacks to come from predictable directions. Rebel provinces found themselves surrounded by imperial forces that seemed to materialize from solid rock, while loyal cities received reinforcements through supply lines that enemy raiders could never locate or intercept. When Spanish conquistadors later demanded gold from Inca treasuries, much of the precious metal came not from active mines, but from vast storerooms hidden within the passage system. These chambers contained accumulations spanning millennia, gathered by civilizations that understood gold's true value, lay not in personal wealth but in its electrical properties and resistance to corrosion that made it ideal for preserving important information on metal sheets that would survive indefinitely. The Inca discovered that certain chambers functioned as communication centers, where messages could be transmitted instantly across vast distances through methods their scholars never fully understood. Operators trained in these techniques could coordinate military campaigns, manage resource distribution, and maintain administrative control over territories spanning multiple climate zones and geographical barriers that should have made centralized government impossible. In the lowest chambers, ceremonies showed that the first builders had woven spiritual knowledge directly into the stonework, shaping environments where awareness expanded on its own, without the aid of plants or ritual complexity. Imperial priests learned to use these chambers for training elite administrators and military commanders who needed enhanced mental capabilities to manage the complexities of governing such a vast and diverse empire. Along the protected routes, merchants exchanged not only material goods, but also knowledge encoded in knotted cords, textile motifs, and creative practices that linked distant communities. The passages served as universities, where scholars from different provinces could share discoveries without the dangers and delays associated with overland travel through territories that remained politically unstable. The emperor himself made pilgrimages through the network, visiting sacred sites where he communed with the preserved spirits of the ancient builders, and received guidance for making decisions that affected millions of subjects. These journeys required months of preparation and spiritual purification, as improper approach to the deepest chambers could result in madness or death for those whose consciousness could not withstand direct contact with forces that transcended normal human understanding. Elite Inca bloodlines developed physical characteristics that seemed to indicate adaptation to the passage environment, enhanced night vision, improved balance for navigating narrow ledges, and respiratory efficiency that allowed sustained activity at depths where oxygen levels challenged normal human physiology. These traits suggested that imperial families had intermarried with descendants of the original builders, creating genetic lineages that bridged the gap between ancient wisdom and contemporary power. The Spanish conquest began the gradual abandonment of the passage system as European diseases decimated populations that maintained the network, and colonial administrators forbade indigenous peoples from accessing sites that might contain evidence challenging Christian cosmology. Within a generation, most entrances had been sealed or forgotten, their locations known only to scattered groups of survivors who preserved fragments of the greater knowledge through oral traditions that grew more distorted with each telling. But the chambers themselves remained intact, their contents protected by environmental conditions and security measures that the builders had designed to survive civilizational collapse. Deep within the mountains of Ecuador, gold plates still record the astronomical calculations that guided ancient astronomers, while crystalline formations continue generating energies that maintain optimal preservation conditions for knowledge that waits patiently for rediscovery by future generations, ready to approach these mysteries with proper understanding and pure intentions. The year 1200 AD brought apocalypse to the cities below ground. The massive earthquake struck during the Festival of Lights, when thousands had gathered in the great ceremonial chamber to celebrate the winter solstice. Children held glowing crystals, while elders chanted the ancient songs, their voices echoing through corridors that had resonated with human prayers for 3 millennia. Then the mountain moved. The first tremor crack the massive granite pillars that supported the central hall. Priests continued their ceremony, even as dust rained from the carved ceiling, believing their rituals could appease whatever spirits had awakened in the earth's depths. The second shockwave split the floor, swallowing entire families into crevices that opened like hungry mouths. By the third convulsion, the chamber's roof collapsed completely, crushing 2,000 people beneath stones that had stood firm since before Christ walked the earth. But the true horror began when the rivers broke free. For centuries, underground streams had flowed through carefully engineered channels that carried meltwater from distant peaks to cities that had never seen rain. The earthquake shattered these ancient waterways, releasing torrents that roared through corridors faster than running feet could escape. The floodwaters rose 30 feet in minutes, trapping thousands in chambers that became tombs filled with liquid death. Young Amaru pressed his face against the rising water, gasping the last pocket of air near the ceiling of what had been his family's workshop. His wife Chuya held their infant daughter above her head, singing lullabies even as the water reached her chin. When the baby's cries finally stopped, Chuya released her grip and sank beneath the surface, joining the hundreds who chose drowning over the slower agony of suffocation. Survivors trapped in higher chambers heard screams echoing from sealed passages for weeks afterward. The sounds came through solid rock, carried by acoustic properties that had once enabled communication across vast distances, but now transmitted only the desperate cries of the buried alive. Rescue teams tried following the voices, only to trigger new collapses that claimed the would-be saviors, along with those they sought to reach. The Keeper of Memories, an ancient woman named Mama Killer, who had lived her entire 90 years in the depths, used her dying breath to recite the locations of 12 emergency supply chambers scattered throughout the network. Her granddaughter Inti carved these directions into stone with trembling hands, knowing that families might survive for months in sealed pockets if they could reach the hidden food stores. Search parties found evidence of attempted escapes throughout the ruined passages. Bloody handprints marked walls where people had clawed at solid stone with their bare fingers. Messages carved in darkness told stories of love and loss. Tupac seeks his children in the Chamber of Stars, and Sumac waits by the crystal pool for her husband's return. Most heartbreaking of all, rescuers discovered a chamber where an extended family had arranged themselves in a circle, holding hands as they waited for air to run out. The earthquake's epicenter lay directly beneath the main intersection, where 7 major routes converged in a great hall, lined with metal plates recording the accumulated wisdom of ages. This central library, containing maps of every passage and instructions for maintaining the ancient systems, vanished completely when the mountain's foundations shifted. Without these guides, survivors could not coordinate repairs or even locate alternative routes between isolated communities. Entire sections of the network filled with rubble as supporting walls failed in chain reactions that continued for days after the initial shock. The master builders had engineered their construction to flex during minor tremors, but no human planning could withstand forces that moved entire mountain ranges. Passages that had carried traffic for 2,000 years became solid barriers of broken stone that would require generations to clear. The water damage proved even more devastating than the collapses. Chambers that had remained perfectly dry since their construction now hosted rivers that dissolved ancient adhesives and undermined foundations designed for stability rather than flood resistance. Precious manuscripts carved on organic materials turned to sludge, while metal plates corroded in moisture that carried acids from decomposing plant matter swept down from the surface world. Communities that survived the initial catastrophe faced slow death as their support systems failed. Ventilation shafts blocked by debris created pockets of stale air that killed sleeping families through carbon dioxide poisoning. Food stores spoiled when flooded chambers created humidity that encouraged rot in supplies designed to last decades. Fresh water sources became contaminated with corpses and waste from destroyed sanitation systems. The catastrophe fractured more than stone. It shattered the unified culture that had maintained the passages for millennia. Isolated groups of survivors developed different theories about what had caused the disaster. Some blamed angry spirits, offended by changes in ritual practices. Others believed the ancient builders had returned to reclaim their creation. A few insisted that surface dwellers had somehow triggered the destruction through disrespectful behavior above the sacred sites. Mama Wera led her small band of survivors through flooded corridors toward the Chamber of Winds, where moving air suggested connection to the surface world. They waded through water that rose to their chests, carrying children on their shoulders, while feeling along walls for passages their feet could no longer follow. When they finally reached dry ground 3 days later, only half their number remained alive. The trauma broke many minds that had adapted to life in eternal darkness. Survivors who managed to reach surface exits found sunlight unbearable and open spaces terrifying after generations of living within stone walls. They huddled in caves near the entrances, neither fully above ground nor truly below, creating communities of refugees who preserved fragments of the greater knowledge while slowly forgetting its context and meaning. Some survivors became obsessed with reopening collapsed passages, spending their remaining years clearing rubble stone by stone. They died exhausted and mad, having moved mountains of debris only to find more destruction beyond each barrier they removed. Their children inherited the obsession, but not the technical knowledge needed to restore damaged systems, creating generations of diggers who destroyed more than they repaired. The Shuar believed this catastrophe was divine punishment for humans growing too proud, thinking they could rival the gods by building their own version of heaven beneath the earth. They say the mountain spirits grew angry, watching people live like moles, forgetting their connection to sky and stars. The earthquake was Pachamama's way of forcing her children back to the surface world where they belonged. According to tradition, those who escaped the wreckage carried with them curses that clung to their descendants for 7 generations. Children born to tunnel refugees showed signs of their parents' trauma, fear of enclosed spaces, inability to see clearly in daylight, and persistent dreams of drowning in darkness. These inherited memories created populations that avoided cave systems entirely, declaring the depths forbidden to all but the most powerful shamans. The scattered survivors who remained below developed new survival strategies based on small, isolated communities, rather than the vast, interconnected cities of the past. They sealed themselves into chambers that could support 50 people rather than thousands, creating redundant systems that might survive future disasters. These fortress communities preserved essential knowledge while abandoning the grand vision of underground civilization that had motivated their ancestors. Recovery efforts continued sporadically for centuries, but each generation possessed less knowledge about the original systems than the previous one. Repair techniques that required coordination between multiple communities became impossible when those communities could no longer communicate. Essential maintenance fell victim to territorial disputes between survivor groups who fought over access to remaining functional areas. By 1400 AD, most passages lay abandoned and forgotten, their entrances hidden by landslides or deliberately concealed by descendants who had learned to fear the depths their ancestors once called home. The Great Catastrophe had succeeded in burying not just people and buildings, but the very memory of what humanity had achieved in its boldest attempt to create paradise beneath the mountains. Francisco Pizarro's brother Gonzalo led 5,000 men into the Amazon seeking El Dorado, but his indigenous guides spoke of something greater than golden cities, passages containing the accumulated wisdom of all ancient civilizations. The Conquistador had conquered the Inca Empire and claimed its surface treasures, yet native chiefs whispered of corridors where gods themselves had stored knowledge that could make mortals immortal. Under torture, captured leaders revealed entrance locations, their screams echoing through conquistador camps as heated iron extracted secrets their people had died to protect. But the Europeans found only death in the darkness. Soldier Juan de Santillan wrote in his journal of entering a passage near Quito with 20 men, following routes that seemed to lead toward the center of the earth itself. His torch revealed walls carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly, while strange breezes carried scents of flowers that had never grown under sunlight. 3 days later, Santillan emerged alone, his hair turned white and his hands shaking uncontrollably as he spoke of cities populated by the dead. The Catholic Church dispatched specialized teams of priest explorers to investigate claims of demonic activity in the underground systems. Father Cristobal de Albornoz documented his 19-day subterranean journey in reports that were immediately classified by papal authorities. The priest described perfectly preserved bodies that appeared to watch his passage with eyes that tracked movement, despite being centuries dead, chambers where gravity behaved strangely, and water flowed upward against all natural laws. Most disturbing of all, Albornoz found Christian crosses carved into corridor walls, in locations that predated Columbus by centuries. The symbols were integrated into geometric patterns that suggested mathematical knowledge, far exceeding European understanding, while inscriptions in Latin praised Christ, using theological concepts that would not be developed by church scholars for another 300 years. His report concluded that the passages contained evidence of pre-flood civilization that could challenge biblical chronology entirely. The Vatican sealed Albornoz's documentation in archives that remain classified today, while officially declaring the network natural formations of no spiritual significance. But privately, Pope Clement VII authorized additional expeditions led by Jesuit scholars trained in both theology and archaeology. These secret missions continued for decades, their findings stored in vaults beneath St. Peter's Basilica alongside other discoveries deemed too dangerous for public knowledge. European mining engineers attempted using indigenous labor to explore passages for gold extraction, believing that routes leading so deep must access veins of precious metals. They forced captured chiefs to provide maps showing layouts, then sent work crews into the depths with orders to collect ore samples and identify mining opportunities. But the native workers had other plans for their conquistador overseers. On the night of the autumn equinox in 1547, indigenous workers from 12 different tribes executed the most coordinated resistance operation in colonial history. They had spent months communicating through the networks, passing messages in darkness between groups that had never met above ground. At precisely midnight, they collapsed strategic passages throughout the system, trapping over 300 European overseers in chambers that offered no escape routes to the outside world. The trapped conquistadors had brought enough supplies for 3 days of exploration, expecting to return to base camps each evening. Instead, they found themselves sealed in darkness with limited food, fouled water, and air that grew staler with each breath. Some tried digging through collapsed roots with bare hands, their fingernails breaking against stones fitted together so perfectly that knife blades could not penetrate the joints. Captain Diego Vasquez kept a journal during his final weeks below ground, describing how his men descended into madness as their torches died and hunger gnawed their bellies. They heard voices calling from other sealed chambers, fellow Europeans who had been trapped in different sections of the network. The voices grew weaker each day until only echoes remained, bouncing through passages that would never again carry living human speech. The European retaliation was swift and brutal. Colonial armies burned entire villages and killed thousands of indigenous people in punishment for their coordinated rebellion. Governor Gonzalo Pizarro, the same man who had survived his underground ordeal years earlier, ordered the execution of every native leader who could be connected to passage knowledge. But the conquistadors never again attempted large-scale exploration, having learned that the corridors protected themselves through means their minds could not comprehend. Church records from the period describe exorcism rituals performed on conquistador soldiers who returned from expeditions speaking in ancient languages. These men claimed allegiance to non-Christian entities they had encountered in the depths, describing beings of pure light who offered eternal knowledge in exchange for abandoning the Catholic faith. Several possessed soldiers demonstrated abilities that terrified their commanders, predicting earthquakes days in advance, healing wounds through touch, and communicating across vast distances without messengers. Father Miguel Cabrera performed exorcisms on 12 soldiers between 1548 and 1552, recording events that unsettled his theological training. The men spoke fluently in tongues older than Latin, sketched precise maps of places they had never seen, and recited mathematical formulas unknown to Europe for centuries. Most chilling of all, they foretold the deaths of specific people months before they happened. Colonial administrators officially declared the incidents isolated cases of indigenous witchcraft, while privately funding expeditions that continued failing for the next 300 years. These secret missions sought gold and silver to fund Europe's endless wars, but they found only madness and death in chambers, protected by forces that recognized no European authority whatsoever. The indigenous peoples developed increasingly sophisticated methods for protecting entrances from conquistador discovery. They created false passages that led explorers into dead ends where poisonous gases accumulated, while concealing real entrances behind rock slides that appeared natural, but could be quickly cleared by those who knew the proper techniques. European scouts reported finding openings, only to return with larger expeditions and find solid rock, where roots had existed days earlier. Stories spread throughout the colonial territories about conquistador expeditions that entered passages and emerged speaking perfect indigenous languages, claiming to have been adopted by underground spirits who taught them the true history of the Americas. These converts abandoned European customs entirely, living among native communities and sharing knowledge that seemed to come from sources beyond human understanding. Before the dawn of the 17th century, the church had already counted over 200 colonists who entered the systems and emerged with a profoundly altered sense of reality. Many abandoned Christianity entirely, claiming to have met the original gods who created humanity long before biblical times. Others attempted to reconcile their experiences with Catholic doctrine, producing theological writings that the Vatican deemed heretical and dangerous. The mysteries gradually faded from colonial records. As administrators learned to avoid investigating phenomena they could not control or understand. Official documents from the late colonial period make no mention of the networks, though private journals and family letters continue describing strange encounters and unexplained disappearances in regions where entrances were rumored to exist. Seeking wealth and fame in the deep places, The conquistadors found that not all treasures could be claimed without unbearable sacrifice. Their bones still rest in collapsed chambers where darkness preserves their remains, alongside the indigenous peoples they enslaved. In those silent depths, European and native, conqueror and conquered, Christian and pagan lie equal in death, their ambitions swallowed by passages that outlasted empires and will outlast whatever civilizations rise from their ashes. In 1859, Father Theodor Schumann entered Shuar territory, carrying only a Bible and medical supplies in his worn leather satchel. Unlike conquistadors seeking gold or rubber barons seeking slaves, the Moravian missionary sought souls for his distant god. The forest people watched this pale stranger treat their children's fevers with imported medicines while speaking broken words in their ancient language, his hands gentle where other foreigners brought only violence and chains. The Shuar elders tested the priest's character through trials that would have broken lesser men. They led him through jungle paths where poisonous snakes hung from every branch, made him drink bitter plant brews that induced visions of his own death, and left him alone in the forest during nights when jaguars screamed from the darkness. Each morning, he returned to their village with quiet dignity, tending the sick and learning new words in their language without complaint or demand for protection. Where once they had run at every European approach, the children now followed the Moravian priest as he moved through their routines. He shared his simple meals with hungry families, used his medical knowledge to save lives during epidemic outbreaks, and demonstrated genuine respect for customs that other foreigners mocked as primitive superstition. After 2 years of patient service, the tribal council agreed that this strange white man might possess the pure heart required to hear their greatest secrets. The German priest spent 7 years learning the Shuar language and earning trust, before warriors painted his face with sacred symbols and led him toward the Cueva de los Tallos. Father Schumann had heard rumors about mysterious caves from other religious workers, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of standing before an entrance that seemed to exhale breath from depths beyond human comprehension. His Shuar guides performed ceremonies with tobacco and fermented beverages, asking ancestral spirits for permission to bring an outsider into realms where only the initiated could survive. What the priest found in those depths challenged both his faith and scientific understanding completely. The metal libraries contained astronomical calculations predicting eclipses centuries in advance, anatomical drawings showing surgical procedures unknown to European medicine, and most troubling for a Christian cleric, creation stories that preceded Genesis by thousands of years. The metallic sheets were organized according to principles that suggested advanced filing systems, with cross-references connecting subjects through methods that reminded him of monastery scriptoriums. Father Theodore's hands trembled as he examined plates covered with symbols that seemed to shift meaning depending on viewing angle and lighting conditions. Some sheets showed mathematical formulas that would not be discovered by European scholars for centuries, while others displayed star charts mapping celestial movements with precision that exceeded the best observatories in Rome. Most disturbing of all, certain plates contained what appeared to be prophecies describing future events with specificity that suggested their authors possessed supernatural foresight. In secret codes, the German priest sent letters to his superiors, recounting discoveries that unsettled the very roots of his faith. The creation accounts found in the metal libraries described multiple cycles of human civilization, rising and falling according to cosmic patterns, with each cycle achieving greater technological advancement before natural disasters forced survivors to rebuild from primitive conditions. These stories portrayed human history as recurring education, with advanced beings serving as teachers who guided development until students proved ready for greater responsibilities. The Moravian Church ordered the priest to cease his investigations immediately, declaring the metal libraries either demonic deceptions or indigenous forgeries designed to undermine Christian faith. Church authorities commanded him to focus solely on converting the Shuar to proper religious beliefs, while avoiding any further exploration of caves that clearly served as centers for pagan ritual practices. But the German cleric had already been transformed by what he witnessed in the depths below. Working secretly with sympathetic Shuar elders, Schumann created detailed maps of entrance locations, not for exploitation, but for preservation of sites that contain knowledge invaluable to human understanding. He recognized that advancing colonization would soon threaten these repositories, and he established a network of indigenous Christians sworn to protect the caves, while pretending conversion to satisfy colonial administrators who monitored religious activities. Young warriors, like Samaraint, learned to play dual roles, attending Christian services on Sundays, while maintaining traditional ceremonies that honored the spirits dwelling in the sacred passages. These secret guardians developed coded languages that allowed them to share information about cave conditions and entrance security without alerting European observers to their true activities and beliefs. The priest documented his growing certainty that the metal libraries represented genuine historical records rather than religious mythology. The mathematical precision of astronomical data, the accurate anatomical knowledge, and the sophisticated organizational systems suggested authors who possessed scientific capabilities that exceeded contemporary European achievements by centuries. The German cleric began questioning whether his own religious traditions might be incomplete versions of more comprehensive teachings preserved in the depths. Church superiors grew alarmed by letters that increasingly questioned established doctrine about human origins and biblical chronology. When Father Schumann suggested that the metal libraries might contain divine revelations that preceded and supplemented Christian scripture, Moravian authorities threatened to recall him immediately unless he abandoned his cave investigations and focused exclusively on conventional work among the forest people. But the priest could not forget what he had witnessed in chambers, where metal sheets recorded knowledge that answered questions Christian theology could only address through faith. The precision of astronomical predictions, the advanced understanding of human anatomy, and the detailed historical records spanning millennia suggested that the libraries contained factual information rather than religious speculation or primitive mythology. His final letter, written 3 days before fever, claimed his life in 1866, speaks of receiving a vision during his last descent into the sacred caves. In the deepest chamber he had ever reached, the dying man encountered what he described as living light that communicated through direct thought transmission rather than spoken words. The entity showed him images of future times when civilization would face catastrophic challenges that could only be survived through knowledge preserved in repositories like the one he had discovered. The vision revealed that advancing colonization would indeed threaten the cave systems, but also that certain individuals would emerge to bridge the gap between indigenous wisdom and European curiosity. These future guardians would combine scientific methods with spiritual understanding, approaching the metal libraries with reverence rather than greed, seeking knowledge for humanity's benefit rather than personal advancement or institutional power. Schumann's Fever Journal describes his final realization that the passages were never intended as hiding places for treasure or refugees from conflicts. Instead, they served as schools where human consciousness could expand beyond normal limitations. repositories where advanced beings had stored instructions for transcending the cycles of rise and collapse that characterized all previous civilizations. Before dying, the German priest entrusted his maps and documentation to Zamarind, extracting a promise that the young warrior would preserve this information until the prophesied time when worthy seekers would arrive seeking knowledge rather than wealth. The Shuar guardian buried the priest's records in a location known only to his family lineage, ensuring that future generations could fulfill their ancestors' sacred obligation. The cleric who had entered Shuar territory, seeking converts, discovered instead that he had been converted by forces operating according to principles that transcended denominational boundaries. His transformation from orthodox religious worker to guardian of pre-Christian wisdom established patterns that would be repeated by later seekers who approached the passages with genuine spiritual hunger rather than academic curiosity or material ambition. Among indigenous Christians, the priest's legacy lived on. They maintained the outward show of conversion while safeguarding their own traditions alongside the German cleric's hidden records. These communities wove initiation tests to identify who might truly seek the mysteries and who carried only ambition or greed. While the priest's fever tore through other European outposts, the Shuar remained untouched, even though they had tended him in his final days. They read this mystery as a sign. The spirits had accepted the foreign priest into their care, shielding his new people but demanding his life as payment for the knowledge he carried. In 1859, Father Theodor Schumann entered Shuar territory, carrying only a Bible and medical supplies in his worn leather satchel. Unlike conquistadors seeking gold or rubber barons seeking slaves, the Moravian missionary sought souls for his distant god. The forest people watched this pale stranger treat their children's fevers with imported medicines while speaking broken words in their ancient language, his hands gentle where other foreigners brought only violence and chains. The Shuar elders tested the priest's character through trials that would have broken lesser men. They led him through jungle paths where poisonous snakes hung from every branch, made him drink bitter plant brews that induced visions of his own death, and left him alone in the forest during nights when jaguars screamed from the darkness. Each morning, he returned to their village with quiet dignity, tending the sick and learning new words in their language without complaint or demand for protection. Where once they had run at every European approach, the children now followed the Moravian priest as he moved through their routines. He shared his simple meals with hungry families, used his medical knowledge to save lives during epidemic outbreaks, and demonstrated genuine respect for customs that other foreigners mocked as primitive superstition. After 2 years of patient service, the tribal council agreed that this strange white man might possess the pure heart required to hear their greatest secrets. The German priest spent 7 years learning the Shuar language and earning trust, before warriors painted his face with sacred symbols and led him toward the Cueva de los Tallos. Father Schumann had heard rumors about mysterious caves from other religious workers, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of standing before an entrance that seemed to exhale breath from depths beyond human comprehension. His Shuar guides performed ceremonies with tobacco and fermented beverages, asking ancestral spirits for permission to bring an outsider into realms where only the initiated could survive. What the priest found in those depths challenged both his faith and scientific understanding completely. The metal libraries contained astronomical calculations predicting eclipses centuries in advance, anatomical drawings showing surgical procedures unknown to European medicine, and most troubling for a Christian cleric, creation stories that preceded Genesis by thousands of years. The metallic sheets were organized according to principles that suggested advanced filing systems, with cross-references connecting subjects through methods that reminded him of monastery scriptoriums. Father Theodore's hands trembled as he examined plates covered with symbols that seemed to shift meaning depending on viewing angle and lighting conditions. Some sheets showed mathematical formulas that would not be discovered by European scholars for centuries, while others displayed star charts mapping celestial movements with precision that exceeded the best observatories in Rome. Most disturbing of all, certain plates contained what appeared to be prophecies describing future events with specificity that suggested their authors possessed supernatural foresight. In secret codes, the German priest sent letters to his superiors, recounting discoveries that unsettled the very roots of his faith. The creation accounts found in the metal libraries described multiple cycles of human civilization, rising and falling according to cosmic patterns, with each cycle achieving greater technological advancement before natural disasters forced survivors to rebuild from primitive conditions. These stories portrayed human history as recurring education, with advanced beings serving as teachers who guided development until students proved ready for greater responsibilities. The Moravian Church ordered the priest to cease his investigations immediately, declaring the metal libraries either demonic deceptions or indigenous forgeries designed to undermine Christian faith. Church authorities commanded him to focus solely on converting the Shuar to proper religious beliefs, while avoiding any further exploration of caves that clearly served as centers for pagan ritual practices. But the German cleric had already been transformed by what he witnessed in the depths below. Working secretly with sympathetic Shuar elders, Schumann created detailed maps of entrance locations, not for exploitation, but for preservation of sites that contained knowledge invaluable to human understanding. He recognized that advancing colonization would soon threaten these repositories, and he established a network of indigenous Christians sworn to protect the caves, while pretending conversion to satisfy colonial administrators who monitored religious activities. Young warriors, like Samaraint, learned to play dual roles, attending Christian services on Sundays, while maintaining traditional ceremonies that honored the spirits dwelling in the sacred passages. These secret guardians developed coded languages that allowed them to share information about cave conditions and entrance security without alerting European observers to their true activities and beliefs. The priest documented his growing certainty that the metal libraries represented genuine historical records rather than religious mythology. The mathematical precision of astronomical data, the accurate anatomical knowledge, and the sophisticated organizational systems suggested authors who possessed scientific capabilities that exceeded contemporary European achievements by centuries. The German cleric began questioning whether his own religious traditions might be incomplete versions of more comprehensive teachings preserved in the depths. Church superiors grew alarmed by letters that increasingly questioned established doctrine about human origins and biblical chronology. When Father Schumann suggested that the metal libraries might contain divine revelations that preceded and supplemented Christian scripture, Moravian authorities threatened to recall him immediately unless he abandoned his cave investigations and focused exclusively on conventional work among the forest people. But the priest could not forget what he had witnessed in chambers, where metal sheets recorded knowledge that answered questions Christian theology could only address through faith. The precision of astronomical predictions, the advanced understanding of human anatomy, and the detailed historical records spanning millennia suggested that the libraries contained factual information rather than religious speculation or primitive mythology. His final letter, written 3 days before fever claimed his life in 1866, speaks of receiving a vision during his last descent into the sacred caves. in the deepest chamber he had ever reached, the dying man encountered what he described as living light that communicated through direct thought transmission rather than spoken words. The entity showed him images of future times when civilization would face catastrophic challenges that could only be survived through knowledge preserved in repositories like the one he had discovered. The vision revealed that advancing colonization would indeed threaten the cave systems, but also that certain individuals would emerge to bridge the gap between indigenous wisdom and European curiosity. These future guardians would combine scientific methods with spiritual understanding, approaching the metal libraries with reverence rather than greed, seeking knowledge for humanity's benefit rather than personal advancement or institutional power. Schumann's Fever Journal describes his final realization that the passages were never intended as hiding places for treasure or refugees from conflicts. Instead, they served as schools where human consciousness could expand beyond normal limitations. Repositories where advanced beings had stored instructions for transcending the cycles of rise and collapse that characterized all previous civilizations. Before dying, the German priest entrusted his maps and documentation to Zamarind, extracting a promise that the young warrior would preserve this information until the prophesied time when worthy seekers would arrive seeking knowledge rather than wealth. The Shuar guardian buried the priest's records in a location known only to his family lineage, ensuring that future generations could fulfill their ancestors' sacred obligation. The cleric who had entered Shuar territory, seeking converts, discovered instead that he had been converted by forces operating according to principles that transcended denominational boundaries. His transformation from orthodox religious worker to guardian of pre-Christian wisdom established patterns that would be repeated by later seekers who approached the passages with genuine spiritual hunger rather than academic curiosity or material ambition. Among indigenous Christians, the priest's legacy lived on. They maintained the outward show of conversion while safeguarding their own traditions alongside the German cleric's hidden records. These communities wove initiation tests to identify who might truly seek the mysteries and who carried only ambition or greed. While the priest's fever tore through other European outposts, the Shuar remained untouched, even though they had tended him in his final days. They read this mystery as a sign. The spirits had accepted the foreign priest into their care, shielding his new people but demanding his life as payment for the knowledge he carried. Neil Armstrong's participation in the 1976 expedition to the Cueva de los Tallos remains one of history's most enigmatic episodes. Why would the first man on the moon join a dangerous exploration of Ecuadorian caves when he could have chosen any scientific project in the world? Declassified documents suggest the astronaut believed the passages might contain evidence of ancient contact with non-terrestrial intelligence, connections that could explain humanity's rapid technological development during specific historical periods. Joint British-Ecuadorian teams established base camps while the famous explorer studied maps that had been classified since Morich's initial discovery 7 years earlier. Military personnel trained in underground warfare provided security, while communications specialists brought equipment originally designed for spacecraft operations. Over 100 personnel worked to create supply lines and emergency protocols for an exploration that would push the boundaries of human endurance in environments where a single mistake could prove fatal. For 3 weeks, the mission proceeded according to careful scientific protocols established by researchers who understood the dangers of cave exploration in systems that had claimed countless lives over the centuries. Team members mapped accessible passages, collected biological specimens from unique ecosystems that thrived in perpetual darkness, and documented acoustic phenomena that created three-dimensional sound images when specific frequencies were introduced into the chamber systems. On day 18, Armstrong personally descended to the deepest level his team had reached, following routes that required rappelling down vertical shafts and crawling through openings barely wide enough for a man wearing full safety equipment. Team photographer Marcus Webb documented the moment when his headlamp illuminated a chamber wall covered in metallic symbols identical to those Moritz had photographed years earlier. Vindication that the Hungarian explorer had indeed discovered something extraordinary in these depths. Working in complete darkness, except for their helmet lights, Webb's cameras captured the astronaut, kneeling before a crystalline formation that emitted measurable electromagnetic pulses synchronized with Earth's rotation. When he removed his gloves and placed bare hands on the crystal surface, base camp instruments registered a massive energy surge that briefly illuminated chambers for miles in all directions, creating a light show that penetrated solid rock and emerged from cave openings scattered across multiple mountain ranges. Base camp radios crackled with reports from observation posts that had detected the electromagnetic pulse from distances exceeding 50 miles. Monitoring stations in Hawaii recorded the anomaly as an unexplained energy signature that NASA immediately classified, while seismic equipment throughout South America registered harmonic vibrations that continued for hours after the space hero broke contact with the crystal formation. His personal journal, discovered after his death in 2012, describes experiencing what he called complete cosmic perspective during the moments his hands touched the crystalline structure. The astronaut witnessed Earth's history from formation through far future, seeing the passage builders as consciousness forms who could manipulate matter through focused intention rather than physical tools. These beings had created the systems as development centers for expanding human awareness beyond current limitations. Through direct mental contact, the entities showed him their purpose in constructing consciousness laboratories throughout the planet. Each chamber was calibrated to specific awareness frequencies, explaining why some explorers experienced profound revelations while others found only empty stone. Only individuals who had transcended ego-driven motivations could access the information encoded in the crystalline formations that served as data storage devices for knowledge-spanning cosmic time. Years later, team members reported that Armstrong moved with unusual grace after his crystal contact, displaying uncanny ability to navigate the passages without instruments or maps. He knew locations of routes their surveys had not recorded, and predicted weather changes with perfect accuracy that saved the expedition from flash floods that would have trapped them below ground. Most remarkably, electronic equipment functioned normally in his presence despite electromagnetic anomalies that disrupted other team members' devices. Before departing, he performed a ceremony the entities had shown him during his vision, placing hands on specific crystal formations while vocalizing tones that resonated through the entire system. Base camp instruments recorded harmonic frequencies that continued for hours after the ritual ended, as if the passages themselves were singing in response to properly activated sequences that had waited centuries for someone capable of completing them. Webb's cameras documented their exit through routes that showed different configurations than their entrance maps had recorded. Passages they had measured extensively now led to chambers they had never seen, while equipment caches placed for retrieval had vanished completely. Their surveying instruments showed distances that contradicted their previous measurements, suggesting the passages existed in dimensional states that transcended normal spatial relationships. During debriefing sessions, team members struggled to explain experiences that challenged their understanding of physics and consciousness. Several reported dreams where they received detailed information about construction techniques, while others claimed temporary telepathic abilities that allowed silent communication with teammates during critical navigation sequences. Stanley Hall's classified report described finding chambers that served as libraries for knowledge encoded in crystal matrices rather than written documents. Information was stored as electromagnetic patterns that could be accessed directly by human consciousness when properly prepared through meditation and spiritual discipline. Hall theorized that the builders had transcended physical existence while maintaining active presence through crystalline formations that functioned as consciousness transfer devices. Dr. Mark Burnett documented physiological changes in team members who spent extended time in the deepest chambers. Their brain activity showed patterns associated with enhanced intuition and expanded sensory perception, while blood tests revealed cellular modifications that improved oxygen utilization and electromagnetic sensitivity. These changes persisted for months after the expedition returned to normal altitude and atmospheric conditions. Armstrong's final expedition report, classified immediately upon submission, concluded that the passages represented technology indistinguishable from magic to current human understanding. He recommended establishing permanent research stations with indigenous shamans as primary investigators, arguing that Western scientific methods alone were insufficient for comprehending achievements that operated according to consciousness principles rather than mechanical engineering. For 36 years, until his death, the hero who had walked on lunar soil quietly supported research into Earth's mysteries through private foundations that funded expeditions led by spiritual practitioners rather than academic institutions. He understood that some discoveries required preparation of consciousness before technology could reveal their secrets. Lessons learned during weeks spent in chambers, where ancient teachers waited to guide humanity toward cosmic citizenship. 47 years have passed since Neil Armstrong emerged from the sacred depths, forever changed by what he witnessed in chambers where ancient teachers wait beyond the reach of time. The astronaut who had walked on lunar soil carried his tunnel secrets to the grave in 2012, taking with him knowledge that might have transformed human understanding of consciousness and cosmic purpose. His classified journals remain sealed in government vaults, their revelations deemed too profound or dangerous for public release. In the depths beneath Ecuador's mountains, the metal libraries continue their patient existence on stone shelves, carved by hands that understood principles modern science struggles to grasp. Copper and gold sheets hold wisdom that stretches across cosmic ages, their markings guarding truths of human growth, planetary care, and our role in a wider galactic order. Yet this knowledge stays sealed, opening only to those who come with hearts cleansed by selfless service, not by curiosity or ambition. Indigenous guardians continue the vigil their ancestors have maintained for hundreds of generations, passing down protection rituals and entrance locations through oral traditions that adapt to changing circumstances while preserving essential core knowledge. Shuar families still perform ceremonies with ayahuasca and sacred tobacco, asking ancestral spirits for guidance about revealing tunnel secrets to outsiders who arrive claiming scientific or spiritual motivations. Each sunrise brings new seekers to the forests of Ecuador, drawn by stories that spread through internet forums and documentary films exploring ancient mysteries. Most find only ordinary caves and natural formations, their electronic equipment detecting nothing unusual, despite expensive instruments designed to measure electromagnetic anomalies and acoustic irregularities. The passages reveal themselves exclusively to individuals whose consciousness has been prepared through years of spiritual discipline rather than technological sophistication. Somewhere in the darkness below, crystalline formations continue pulsing with energies that maintain optimal preservation conditions for treasures that await rediscovery by humanity's next evolutionary phase. The chambers remain as their builders intended, schools for consciousness development, where students learn to transcend limitations that currently define human potential. But graduation requires abandoning conquest mentality in favor of humble cooperation with forces that created rather than exploited the worlds they inhabited. Visitors still arrive seeking the metal libraries that Morich photographed and Armstrong experienced during his transformation. They bring sophisticated equipment, detailed maps, and theories about tunnel construction that demonstrate impressive intellectual development. Yet they depart disappointed, having found only empty stone chambers that echo with whispers of mysteries that remain forever beyond their grasp. The technology of our era exceeds anything the tunnel makers possessed in mechanical craft or electrical knowledge. Satellites can peer through mountain stone. Computers can process vast amounts of data in microseconds. And communication networks can connect minds across planetary distances. But these achievements are overshadowed by the subtle technologies that shaped passages, acting as bridges between realms where matter and spirit meet. Yet the passages remain sealed against approaches motivated by scientific curiosity alone, opening only to seekers whose spiritual development matches their intellectual capabilities. The builders encoded consciousness requirements into the very structure of their repositories, ensuring that advanced knowledge reaches humanity only when the species proves ready to use such gifts for planetary healing, rather than further exploitation of resources or domination of other peoples. Perhaps the builders knew that humanity would eventually face crises, requiring wisdom that transcends technological solutions, challenges that can only be resolved through consciousness expansion that enables direct cooperation with cosmic intelligence. Climate disruption, resource depletion, and social fragmentation create evolutionary pressure that will either destroy the species or catalyze transformation to developmental stages that make current human achievement seem primitive by comparison. Indigenous prophecies speak of times when surface civilization would exhaust its options and finally turn to underground teachers for guidance about creating sustainable relationships with planetary systems. These predictions describe a period when the passages would open fully, revealing instruction manuals for consciousness technologies that could heal ecological damage while expanding human awareness to cosmic scales. Until humanity learns to approach the depths with reverence rather than conquest, the tunnels maintain their protective silence. They wait with the patience of geological ages, their treasures preserved in chambers where time moves according to different principles than those governing surface existence. The ancient libraries remain ready to transform human understanding when seekers arrive whose hearts have been prepared through service to life rather than accumulation of power or wealth. In chambers where crystal formations sing with harmonics that span galactic distances, patient teachers continue their eternal vigil. They watch humanity's struggles with the compassion of parents observing children who must learn wisdom through experience rather than instruction. The builders understand that consciousness development cannot be forced, but must unfold naturally through cycles of challenge and growth that prepare students for responsibilities that accompany expanded awareness. Each generation produces individuals whose spiritual maturity qualifies them for deeper initiation into mysteries that await rediscovery. These rare seekers find their way to Ecuador's mountains through inner guidance that operates beyond conscious planning, drawn by dreams and visions that reveal entrance locations to consciousness, prepared through lifetimes of selfless dedication to humanity's highest potential. Armstrong's expedition marked the last time modern explorers came close to accessing the full treasures hidden in Ecuador's passages. Since then, the chambers have waited in darkness, while surface civilization advances technologically, but struggles with spiritual development that would qualify the species for graduation to cosmic citizenship. The tunnels preserve their secrets with infinite patience, knowing that worthy students will eventually arrive ready to receive knowledge that transcends current human imagination. The metal libraries continue their eternal existence in chambers carved from living rock, by consciousness that could shape matter through focused intention. Their pages record instructions for developing abilities that seem miraculous to current understanding. Healing through touch, communication across vast distances without technology, and direct perception of cosmic principles that govern planetary evolution and stellar development. When humanity finally proves ready to approach these underground teachers with proper humility and pure motivation, the passages will open fully for the first time since the Great Catastrophe of 1200 AD. Until then, they wait in sacred darkness, preserving gifts that could solve every crisis currently threatening species survival, while maintaining protection against those who would use such knowledge for conquest, rather than service to the cosmic community that awaits Earth's graduation from planetary childhood to stellar citizenship.